Hi, thank you for joining today, and welcome to our webinar, 10 Questions You Need to Ask About Cybersecurity Threats in Your Azure Environment. I'm Sherry Lloyd, the moderator for today's webinar, and I am joined by Neil Wilkins, Garland Technologies Technical Manager, Vijit Nair, Senior Director of Product Management at Corelight, and Jerald Perry, Technical Marketing Engineer at Humio. Our panelists will have an interactive discussion using the questions that I posed to highlight the cybersecurity threats that lurk across your Azure and hybrid cloud environments, with suggestions on how to mitigate these risks to secure your cloud deployments. Before I begin, I wanted to give each panelist an opportunity to just quickly introduce themselves and their background. And with that, I'll start with Jerald.
Hey, thanks, Sherry. So my name's Jerald Perry. Humio Technical Marketing Engineer, as Sherry said. Been here going on 6 months, about 5.5 months at Humio. Prior to that, I was at Palo Alto Networks for close to 7 years, doing multiple things there, from escalation support to the technical marketing engineer role. And prior to going to work on the vendor side of things, I was a systems integrator, integrating great technologies at customer sites, deploying networks from the ground up.
Vijit?
Hey everybody, I'm Vijit Nair, Senior Director of Product at Corelight. I manage our portfolio of products that span public and private cloud environments and a series of other products here. I've been at Corelight for 1.5 years now. I come via Juniper, where I was the head of product for the cloud segment, and I managed our portfolio there, which spanned data center switching and networking. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Neil?
Hi, I'm Neil Wilkins. I'm Technical Manager here at Garland. I've been here for about 18 months or so. I'm quite honoured to be in such exclusive company as this, to be honest. I've been in the industry longer than I'd like to say, to be fair. In many roles, mostly in the security industry, both for government organisations and in commercial organisations, and various different roles from product management, product marketing to technical engineering.
Great, thanks. So I will start with a level set question for Vijit and Jerald. So I often hear that cloud security is all about configurations and locking things down. Why does visibility matter? And Vijit, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. This is something we get all the time. And the thinking is enterprises are pretty early in their stages of migrating to the cloud. And as enterprises migrate to cloud environments, the initial focus always is on compliance, on reducing the attack surface, on prevention and risk mitigation. And with that comes a focus on, how do you secure your IAM policies? How do you lock down your S3 buckets? How do you enforce your, IMDS? How do you make sure you know all your accounts and organizations are? But as we all know, prevention is never foolproof, right? We wish it was, but it never is. And as enterprises get more mature in their security posture, and as attackers, unfortunately, get more sophisticated, we need to start focusing a lot more on detection and investigation. And for detection and investigation, visibility is absolutely key, right? We need comprehensive visibility in across our cloud environment, and that's an especially challenging in IaaS environments.
Okay, Jerald?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just add a little bit to Vijit's answer. It's a great answer. Not only is it important to reduce the attack surface, it's also very important to maintain a reduced attack surface in the cloud. And the challenge with that is the cloud makes things so easy to spin up environments, to deploy new architectures, test new applications. You can do so many different things on the fly that sometimes it can be overlooked in terms of compliance and maintaining those security practices to keep your security posture in line. So you want to definitely have visibility into everything, because having that visibility will help prevent you from falling out of compliance, and it makes it easier to deploy everything and keep the practices in place to focus on detection and digging deeper into incidents as they happen. So visibility is very important in the cloud because it makes it so easy for you to spin up new things. So yes.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is for Neil and Jerald. What is shared cloud security responsibility and why does it matter?
Shall I take that one first, Sherry?
Yes,
I think if you look at if you look at where you are, in many instances, when you owned the premises on your own, you had responsible for everything. And as both Vijit was saying earlier on, that people are now starting to move to the cloud more and more. So now you don't have complete responsibility. It's different. In an IaaS model, infrastructure as a service, you manage the operating systems, you manage the data. But you got to understand your cloud provider is worried about his infrastructure. So there's where you're working together. He's concerned about the infrastructure, you're concerned about the systems, the data. If you go to the other extreme in the software as a service, he's worried about everything. All you need to worry about is your data and your access rights to the data. And that's where you have to start taking this responsibility in both ends.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I've also found is there's a lot of misconception about the cloud being secure. And I think that misconception comes from the fact that you don't touch a lot of those components in the cloud. So in my career, I've dealt with a lot of customers that come into the cloud thinking that they may not need to apply certain security practices because they think it's already secure. And one of the things we consistently need to do is educate people on the fact that it's a shared responsibility model. And just because you don't touch certain things doesn't mean that there isn't security involved. So there are things that the cloud provider has to secure, the physical element of it, even as far as who has provided access into the data centers in particular regions and so on and so forth, all the way up to the layer 2 level, which no one typically touches in the cloud. So that goes into the security level of the cloud provider's responsibility. Now, as a cloud consumer, I have to look at what I'm deploying, what am I using, and what am I actually touching, what am I configuring? So if you're doing something with infrastructure as a service, you have to really think about software patching. You have to think about access to those devices, whether it's web front, public-facing web servers, database servers. You have to think about what ports you allow to that. You have to think about protocols and things of that nature. So you have to still focus on security all around, from software patching, authentication, protocol access, port access. Does it have to be open to the public? If so, then you really have to be vigilant about how you approach that, because when it's open to the public, it leaves the window open for masquerading and traffic and things like that. So it's very important to understand what you're responsible for, and being in the cloud doesn't absolve us from any security practices.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question is going to also be for Jerald and Vijit. So in a recent survey on cloud visibility, and this is from Dimensional Research, they highlighted that 87% of these respondents feared that a lack of cloud visibility was obscuring security threats. And 95% of respondents said that these visibility problems had led them to experience either application or network performance issues. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Vijit and say, can you comment on why visibility in the cloud is so complicated?
Yeah, the ironic thing about visibility in the cloud is there is actually a ton of visibility available in the form of in-depth logging available in the cloud that is just a button click away, right? So, which is far better than what we had in on-prem environments. The challenge is the scale, right? I mean, let's think about it. Every cloud provider has hundreds of services. Some of them you have to turn on the logging explicitly. Some of them are turned on by default, right? You as a security operations person need to make sure that the logging is turned on and stays turned on, and no attacker can sort of maliciously turn off the the logging that you so depend on in your environment. So that's a scale problem. The other problem is aggregation of logs, right? Some of these services are sending their logs to, Azure Security Center. Some of them are sending it to Event Hub. Some of them are sending it to blob storage. The problem is that you need a way to aggregate all these logs in one place so that you can have one security operations center that can look through all the data in not just one pane of glass, but through sort of one lens, right? And the biggest challenge of all this is normalization of the data. These logs are not built for security. These logs are built for various other purposes. All these different applications generate logs that are of completely different schema, and being able to not just aggregate and ingest the log, but being able to digest it and make sense of the logs, that becomes the biggest problem in visibility in the cloud.
Okay, thank you. So Jerald, I'm going to ask you a second part of this. If native cloud provides its own logging tools, why is having centralized log management important for the security in the cloud?
That's a good question. Very good question. And I'll try to explain it the best I can. And I'm going to walk back to, being a network and systems engineer in my background, going kind of back into history on how we log things and how simplified it was. Back then, it was a lot of just syslog. You had it for your systems, you had it for your routing equipment, you had NetFlow to kind of go deeper into bandwidth and things like that. It was very simplified. As Vijit said, right now within the cloud, you have access to so much log data because there's so many different services within Azure. So when you think about that, you don't want to be going into multiple interfaces, multiple panes of glass to look at that data, because that's going to slow down what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're trying to figure out a performance issue, whether you're trying to solve an application issue as you're in the development cycle, whether you're threat hunting or trying to correlate some sort of incident, look at some sort of indicator of attack, and you're trying to correlate this data. Having all of this data, but kind of spread out to where you have to go to different places to get it, it becomes a challenge. So as Vijit said, being able to aggregate this data is extremely important, because you want to be able to consume this data, put it into a central location so that you then can bring it up and correlate the information as you need. Normalization is a big thing, and that's something else that we briefly discussed here, but normalization is important because you want to have it all in a structure that your organization is used to viewing. You can't have a different structure here, a different structure there. You can do it, but then it slows down your productivity. It slows down your efficiency. It slows down your ability to be proactive when the data is not normalized. So you want to take all of that in consideration, and aggregating all of this data and being able to query what you need real time is extremely important. So when you're looking at that, high compression rate, because the data is growing exponentially. So you want to think about your compression and how you're storing it, and you want to be able to cut costs and eliminate data sets that you don't need. And if you can eliminate some of the indexing data, then you're winning. And if your compression is advanced, then you're doing really well. So it's very important to aggregate that data, provide visibility so that you can be productive and cost effective.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question will go to Vijit and Neil. Why does network visibility in the cloud matter? And Vijit, we'll start with you.
Yeah, application visibility is definitely critical, right? But as we've been discussing so far, application visibility is challenging, especially in the cloud. And for decades, I mean, all of us who've been in the security world, in the traditional on-prem environment, know that network monitoring is used to bridge the gaps that you run into in application level visibility, right? So if you think about network monitoring, it gives you sort of this bird's eye view into your environment, and you can surgically use it to monitor, let's say, all your internet bound traffic, or you want to monitor all the traffic that is hitting your high value assets or crossing some kind of privilege boundary or some other choke point, right? So that gives you a way to surgically monitor the things that you really care about. It is agnostic to cloud provider or applications or services in the cloud. So you get the same view because network packets and network packets, and it doesn't matter, what applications and cloud providers are talking to each other. So you get the same view regardless of what you're monitoring. If you're looking at the network, you get the same view, you get the same data. And most importantly, if you use tools like Zeek, which has been used pretty popularly in the security industry, you get a judgment-free, authoritative view of the data from the network.
Okay, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree a lot there with what Vijit says, but from my perspective, it makes no difference to me whether you're in the cloud or where you are. There is only a single source of truth of what's going on inside your network, and that single source is your packet. And really, that's what we as Garland are about. We're about finding that packet and transparently moving that packet on to whoever it is to see the complete visibility of it. And that really is what we do. You need that 360-degree visibility. You want to see that packet and you need to pass it on. So for me, it's not really a massive amount of difference. There are unique challenges in the cloud, but it's not much different really.
Okay, thank you. So the next question will also go to Neil and Jerald this time. So container usage was almost 39% higher in September 2020 than January 2020, most likely due to COVID. So does this affect the type of visibility needed, and how so? And we'll go ahead and start with Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I think this really is the challenge I was mentioning earlier on. Irrespective of what you are, you can read so much data now that says containerization is the way ahead, and data center operating systems will be containerized, and there are a number of fantastic advantages in there. But this is where the real challenge comes in, because we think in IP addresses, we think in packets, but containers talk to containers. So there's intra-container communication, there's inter-container communication. They are pulled up and pulled down as they are needed. I mean, just a little while ago, I tried to stop a system with a container running on it. You stop it, and it suddenly occurred somewhere else, and it's there. And that is the real challenge. You think, how do I stop this? The orchestration layer has decided, move it around, shift it around. That data is also encrypted that's been going between the two systems. And there's the real challenge, which is why when we developed our Prism's virtual system, it was container based.
Okay, so when a customer is looking at visibility architecture, they should always look for container-based type VTAP, is my understanding of what you just said. Is that correct, Neil?
Yeah. If you want some futuristic side of things, just as an example, one of the big banks in the world said to me recently, that's the bit they worry about. What goes on between those containers and what hides in there that they can't see.
Great. So, Jerald, I'm going to ask the second part to this question.
Okay.
So how does the growth of these microservices make modern log management more challenging, and how does this impact security?
And visibility is the key to security. So you definitely want to prevent. You want to try to prevent something from happening. And I always encourage to have a complete security posture to have your preventative methods in place. But you also want to be prepared to be able to address what traditional measures may not be able to prevent. And you can't do that without visibility. And when we're talking about the explosion of Kubernetes, we're talking about these new technologies. Kubernetes is a very different architecture in terms of having visibility. As Neil mentioned, you have the containers. And then within the containers, you have pods, and each container has its own network. So you can't just simply sit something inline on a network and gather traffic throughout it, because Kubernetes as an architecture, it has its own networking within there that communicates amongst each other via sidecars and different applications. And Kubernetes has proxies that handles the communication from one application to the next. So you have to be able to visualize what is taking place from one component of the application to the next component to have true visibility with that. And when you start to look at things like your app meshes, which provides more controls, more security measures within network flow, within infrastructures and different services, with that visibility and technologies that Garland and Corelight provide, and leverage that with the modern log architecture, you can efficiently and proactively have access to the data that you need at your fingertips to understand what is going on in your environment. So that if you are faced with something, you have the truth, as Neil says, you have the truth of information to be able to take care of what you need to take care of and protect your organization.
Okay, thank you. So this will go to Neil and Vijit. Currently, each cloud platform has a different way of going about network visibility. What about the Azure environment makes network visibility challenging? And Neil, we will go ahead and start with you.
Well, I guess probably to pick specifically on Azure is maybe a little bit unfair. All those cloud environments are very challenging to get to see that packet. The one thing about Azure is, unless it's changed just recently, they don't have a mirroring system. Now, it doesn't mean to say that's worse than anybody else. Others have them, and they're not perfect either. But, you know, from that perspective, I still need to get that 360-degree visibility. And that's the massive challenge when it's like we mentioned earlier on, applications are becoming smaller, they're lightweight, they're containerized, they're flexible, they're moving in all of that cloud environment. And that is where your difficulty is, which is why we're working at kernel level, to be fair, so that we can mirror directly out of the kernel.
Great, thanks. Vijit?
Yeah, I think Neil was spot on, right? Any network visibility requires a tap or a span port. And some of the cloud providers have definitely realized this, and they have their own native tap and span options. You know, none of them are ideal, like Neil said, but in Azure, this has been notably absent, right? So when we talk to customers, they're sort of bending over backwards trying to use these weird tools like, you know, packet captures and hosts and TCP dump and netmon, and a combination of these things to get to that network visibility. That is, you know, it's just not an ideal solution. And especially back to, you know, what we were discussing about container-based security, that becomes even more complicated, right? And that's something not a lot of cloud providers have done well. So that's what is, you know, most challenging in Azure today.
Okay. Jerald, anything to add?
Yeah, just really quick. Another thing to take into consideration is when you're coming from the physical world and you're going to the cloud world, you have to sort of retrain the way you approach networking. And you don't want to just kind of forklift your ideologies of what you would do in the physical infrastructure to the cloud infrastructure, because it doesn't make sense to just put a device inline everywhere to do things. You want to have a more efficient cloud-centric way of accomplishing that, to gather what you need. So that often is a challenge for network engineers coming from a physical environment to the cloud. And something that they should definitely think about is the sensors and the different technology that Corelight and Garland offer to provide that visibility, because it definitely will give you what you need to be able to view what's going on in your environment. And, you know, we appreciate that at Humio.
Great, thank you. So Vijit, this next question specifically for you. So how does packet level visibility, such as the Garland Prism VTAP, expand solutions such as Corelight in cloud environments?
Yeah, good question. And you know, what we as Corelight provide is we have a full suite of open NDR products that we provide our customers for deployment in on-prem and cloud environments. Garland Prism allows us to bridge that hole that we have in Azure and helps our customers deploy, our suite of open NDR solutions in Azure, right? So, like we discussed, Garland gets us access to VM-based traffic, but also goes above and beyond and gets us visibility into east-west container-based traffic as well. So, once we have that network visibility, we can bring the power of the open source tools that we use to provide sort of the data that most of the SOC teams rely on. So when it comes to detection and investigation, the most valuable currency that we have is data. And as security responders know, Zeek has long been known to be the de facto standard for continuous network monitoring. And it has a schema that is sort of purpose-built for security, threat hunting and incident response and so on. So what we at Corelight do is we build a enterprise wrapper around Zeek that makes it extremely easy to deploy, that makes it highly performant, so that you don't have to worry about operating the open source tool itself. You can just focus on the data and what you do with the data. We also sort of go above and beyond what Zeek offers, right? It's a platform that is very extensible, so you can bring in a bunch of your own data, through a bunch of frameworks like Intel and Input frameworks. We have a rich community that has been developing detections and scripts, over the past 25 years. You can bring in all these open source tools and open source scripts directly into the platform. And we have a research team that's building, better, richer insight from network traffic, and all that is available on top of our platform as well. So, all of that now becomes a lot more easily achievable in Azure with the help of Garland Prism.
Okay, terrific. Neil, as a quick follow-up question, if you could just reiterate what makes the Garland VTAP visibility solution superior to all the other vendors out there?
Well, Vijit has done an amazing job of doing that for me, actually. But it is a container-based microservice, so it's very small, it's very lightweight. It mirrors directly out of kernel. Now there are other container-based systems that are sidecar, but then of course you're throwing up another container on top of it, so you probably need another service somewhere around there. And it's fairly unique. It can actually mirror to multiple endpoints as well. And a lot of the other devices can only go to one endpoint.
Okay, thank you. So this next question is for Vijit and Jerald. What is threat hunting, and how can threat hunting teams use this visibility to secure their cloud environments?
Yeah, I can take a crack at it. I'm sure Jerald will add more. You have to think of both, threat hunting and incident response as sort of two sides of the coin, right? When an alert fires, the first thing you do is start triaging that alert and start investigating the incident itself, and that's incident response. And that's a reactive process where when an alert fires, then you're looking through the data of what happened. Threat hunting is a proactive approach where you start from a hypothesis. You start from this could be the badness that I might have in my environment. And then you go about collecting data to validate or invalidate that hypothesis, right? The outcome from a threat hunting could be a variety of things. You might not find something, which in itself is data, right? Or you might find some policy violation. You might find some compliance violation, or you might just find some bad practices. Or if you're lucky, you might actually find an incident that you can then go investigate and prevent, right? The threat hunting becomes, if you think about what threat hunting needs, like I was saying before, data is the currency that threat hunting runs on, because if you need to do any form of reasonable threat hunting, you need a ton of very high fidelity, high signal to noise ratio data. And that's something that we focus on quite a bit, because our customers are pretty mature, have pretty mature threat hunting teams. I'll give you an example. Our research team has been working on something called encrypted traffic collection, which really looks into encrypted traffic for customers that cannot decrypt the traffic for a lot of good reasons. We look at encrypted traffic, and through the signals in encrypted traffic, through the handshake exchange in the session creation, we try to figure out what's going on within that encrypted traffic session, right? So we can detect things like, is multi-factor authentication being used? What kind of activity is going on? Is it a human interactive session or is it a script-based session? Was the right handshake in place before the session was initiated, or was it not? What kind of applications, based on signatures, might be communicating over these sessions, right? If you think of this, none of this is a indicator of badness necessarily. This is all just data. So what a good threat hunting team would do is they can use this data to figure out whether something is malicious, something is wrong, or something is just non-compliant in their environment, and then be able to take any action if needed on that.
Okay, Jerald.
Yeah, I'll try to add some value to what Vijit just said. He pretty much hit it on the head, so I'll go ahead and take a crack at that. I like to look at threat hunting in a manner of, let me put it this way. If you come up to a street and there's no cars driving, there's no traffic, when you go to walk across that street, the majority of us will still look both ways. And we do that because we want to it's always better to be safe than sorry. So I kind of look at threat hunting that way, because in terms of IT security, you're going to have your security practices in place that you're very confident about. And you feel like you've got your edge security. You feel like you've got your east and west security. You feel like your endpoints are fully contained, your application servers, your intrusion detection and prevention, what have you, whatever policies in place, everyone usually feels good about that. However, just because you're not seeing any indicators of compromise or indicators of attack within that does not mean something else is happening. And I say that because the primary method of compromise is usually from people like you and I, not necessarily by profession, but just endpoint users. The days of brute forcing a server and things like that are not as common as they were before. You're usually your phishing emails and things like that. It's more social. It's more 0 day, getting people to click on something that can evade your traditional antivirus endpoint solutions because they may not have a signature for that, or they may not be able to detect the pattern based on heuristics or something like that. So having that in mind, and having access to all of the information that you need to be able to search for indicators of attack. And indicators of attack are something different. Indicators of compromise basically say, hey, we've been compromised, what's going on? Is it still taking place right now? And then your process goes on from there. An indicator of attack means you may not even be compromised. However, you've noticed some sort of indication that someone is trying to compromise you. You might have an end user that has clicked on something that your endpoint software was able to mitigate and prevent. And you may have a string of users that have clicked on the same thing that the endpoint security was able to mitigate and prevent, or maybe they weren't and now you're compromised. But having access to the data to be able to correlate it across multiple sources and say, hey, this person did this at this particular time, and I'm also seeing that these users did that as well, it gives you the ammunition to be able to plan your next steps and to be able to move swiftly to either prevent the full compromisation of your network infrastructure, or to mitigate an existing compromise and prevent the exfiltration of data and the lateral movement that takes place once you are compromised. Because I can tell you, just based on the work I've done and some of the hacking courses I've done, these hackers are pretty awesome. And the goal of an effective hacker is not to come in and walk around your office virtually with the flag that says, hey, I've conquered your network. The goal of a hacker is to infiltrate your network and sit around and watch what's taking place and to gather data without you knowing. The most successful hackers will have been in your network for some time, days, weeks, or months without you knowing, and all they're doing is they're gathering data. They're dumping it into databases that they can then look at offline and say, these are IP schemes. that, and this is this, and this. These are the things that I want to pivot to. So they're planning offline as they dump this information off lightweight in a manner that doesn't compromise the performance of the system that they've infiltrated, so that they can then move laterally and pivot to something that they no longer need you for, and they can get on whenever they want. And if they can compromise your credentials and pass that hash, they can move laterally based on your permissions, or find someone else and move laterally until they hit what they want to hit. And having the ability to have access to this data efficiently, and having the advanced query capabilities to be able to correlate this data, because having the data is one thing, but being able to do something with it is another.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be able to have the querying capabilities to do anomalous detection, so you can kind of look at things based on behaviors and kind of find a trend and a pattern, so you can instinctively say, this doesn't make sense, and you can alert on that real time as you're seeing those patterns. Like, that's very important. So it's a big deal, and threat hunting is very important, and having advanced log management plays a major part into that.
Awesome, thank you. So before I ask my final question, I wanted to let the audience know, feel free to chat any questions you might have. If we don't have time to answer them during this webinar, we will make sure that we get back to you with the answers. So this question will be to all three of you. With the consistent evolution of cloud environments and threat hunting, we obviously haven't seen the end. What do you see as an emerging trend for cloud visibility and security? And Neil, we'll let you take this one first.
Thanks, Sherry. You know, if I had a really good crystal ball, I'd be sitting in Southern California with these two guys, not where I am now, that's for sure. Over the last year, things really have changed and accelerated. I think driven by regulators a lot. What I'm seeing is people securing their data, encrypting it and masking it before sending it to the cloud. But also from a regulation point of view, the keys are stored away. So there's a definite trend to keep their keys somewhere away from the cloud, not in whatever key depot, key locker, the various cloud definers always use it. So that is a big trend I've seen in the last year. And then I'm seeing other things like secure access service edge appearing more and more often. I guess that's some form of next generation VPN, where you're going through one client and one authorization, irrespective of whatever the service you're being used. And a term that you kind of think is being pushed around and name changed, but I can see it happening, is some maybe leading into a cloud access service broker or a content access service broker that manages all your risk across multiple cloud platform providers. But we'll see.
Okay, Jerald?
Yeah, let me, that was a great answer by Neil, most definitely, and I'll try to add to that. With our generation dealing with our first major pandemic, Neil mentioned something that's very important with the secure access service edge. And that's because everyone's no longer in the office. And what that means is, in the office, everything's going through a central location. You have your edge devices. You have inline as well, but you can filter everything at the edge as well. You can do your data loss prevention there. Now that everybody is remote, I see the SaaS, the secure access service as also picking up, because I believe more people are going to be working remotely. But you can't always just backhaul traffic back somewhere, because with cloud, there's not always the need to backhaul back to a headquarters for data and things like that. It's more so in the cloud, and you may be able to get access to that cloud with different SaaS applications, to where now what do? How do you secure that? Because, hey, I'm opening a web browser and I'm getting direct access to what I need there. So because of that, items like CASB, client access security brokers and things like that, I feel like they're going to pick up a lot more. But I also believe that you're going to start to see more centralized security controls and different approaches to security now that we're in a remote capacity, because it no longer makes sense for everyone to VPN back to a central location and backhaul all your traffic back to headquarters with the largest volume, with the volume that we have now, because that'll put such a huge tax, a huge toll on your central infrastructure and your internet costs. So you're going to raise your expenses there by trying to handle that traffic, backhaul all your users so you can secure it outbound. So I think we're going to start to have companies that evolve in their ideologies, have more centralized controls. Who knows, maybe you start to have lightweight sensors on the desktops that are controlled by a controller somewhere that can then leverage your internal firewall, whether it's IP tables, UFW, which is the Linux firewall, or your Windows firewalls, or whatever endpoint client you have that offers that, and kind of leverage what they see from some sort of lightweight flow log traffic in terms of inline traffic, and bam, be able to predict or isolate something based off that. So maybe that's far off, I don't know, but that's kind of how my mind works in terms of security. But we have to start thinking a little bit deeper in terms of decoupling our ideologies with how we secured inline security in the past in the physical world with where we're going now, because it's gonna be COVID or no COVID, a lot more of a remote world for the professional workforce. So we have to do that efficiently. So
Vijit, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what I started with, right? I feel like we are still somewhat in the early phases of migration to the cloud, right? A lot of enterprises are making that migration, and it has, if anything, accelerated because of the pandemic and everything that we've faced in the past year. Cause for optimism is that inherently cloud environments and cloud networks are more secure, but what I think we will see in the over the next several years is I expect attackers will start seeing the value in penetrating cloud environments, and the attackers will get a lot more sophisticated, and we'll start seeing a lot more sophisticated attacks on cloud, be it IaaS or SaaS type environments, right? I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch the Senate hearing around SolarWinds and Sunburst, but one of the things that one of the folks mentioned is that the attackers were sophisticated enough that they did not want to be found for a long time, and as soon as they were found, they went dark, they disappeared immediately, right? But one of the other things that was mentioned was that some of the attackers focused on finding credentials in on-prem environments so that they can then go into cloud environments, because they know that that's where a lot of the valuable data is. That's where a lot of the value is in the attack. And that's a kind of lateral movement that we've definitely seen in the past. But as that gets more sophisticated, I expect attackers will start exploiting a lot of the cloud native services themselves, right? So back to the same point of how do you increase your visibility in a cloud environment will become a lot more important going forward.
Okay, so I would like to give special thanks to our panelists for their time, and please feel free to contact them directly with any questions. The next slide has their contact information, and we'll be following up with you, sending this to you. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you guys. Awesome job.
thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerald and Neil.
Thank you.
Cheers. Nice to see you again.
Nice to
Take
see
care.
you. Bye-bye.